The first bite tasted like betrayal, though I didn't recognize it then. If you're enjoying the story so far, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others who appreciate true crime stories. It really helps support the channel and allows me to bring you more content like this. Sweet potato casserole had always been Mom's specialty, the one dish that could transport me back to childhood Thanksgivings when the world felt safe and our family felt whole. But as the creamy orange mixture hit my tongue that November evening, something was wrong. Not wrong in an obvious way, not bitter or metallic or spoiled, but wrong in a way that made my stomach clench with an inexplicable dread. I sat at the mahogany dining table that had witnessed 27 years of my family's Thanksgiving traditions, surrounded by the familiar faces that should have brought me comfort. Mom bustled between the kitchen and dining room, her silver hair catching the warm glow of the chandelier as she fussed over the perfect placement of serving spoons. Dad carved the turkey with the same ceremonial precision he'd performed every year since I could remember, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he concentrated on creating even slices. And then there was Marcus, my older brother by 3 years, sitting directly across from me with that smile I'd grown up trusting implicitly. That smile should have been my first warning. "How's the sweet potato, Lily?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying that familiar big brother teasing tone that had colored our entire childhood. His dark eyes, so much like my own, held what I interpreted as genuine interest. "Ma made it extra special this year, didn't she?" I forced another spoonful past my lips, trying to identify what felt so off about the taste. There was something underneath the familiar flavors of brown sugar and cinnamon, something that seemed to coat my throat in a way that made me want to reach for my water glass. "It's different," I managed, my voice sounding strangely distant even to my own ears. "Did you change the recipe, Mom?" Our mother, Patricia, paused in her arrangement of the cranberry sauce to look at me with concern creasing her brow. At 62, she still moved with the efficiency of someone half her age, but worry had always aged her face in moments like these. "Not at all, sweetheart. Same recipe I've used for 30 years. Are you feeling all right? You look a little pale." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table in that casual way that had always irritated Mom, but somehow never earned him a reprimand. "Maybe you're just tired from the drive up from the city. When did you get in again?" Around 2, though the words felt thick in my mouth. Had they always been this hard to form? The conversation continued around me, familiar patterns of family interaction that should have been comforting. Dad talked about the football game playing softly on the kitchen television. Mom worried about whether she'd made enough food, despite the fact that our table groaned under the weight of enough dishes to feed twice our number. Marcus shared updates about his job at the pharmaceutical company, the same job that had allowed him to move back in with our parents after his divorce 2 years ago. But as the minutes ticked by, marked by the steady rhythm of the grandfather clock in the hallway, I began to notice things. Small things. The way Marcus's eyes kept flicking to me when he thought I wasn't looking, the way he had insisted on helping Mom in the kitchen earlier, something that had struck me as uncharacteristically thoughtful at the time, the way he had specifically handed me the plate of sweet potato casserole, urging me to try it first because he knew it was my favorite. My favorite. He'd remembered that detail with unusual precision for someone who typically forgot my birthday until Mom reminded him. The room began to feel uncomfortably warm. I tugged at the neckline of my burgundy sweater, the soft cashmere suddenly feeling restrictive against my skin. The chandelier's light seemed brighter than it had moments before, each crystal reflecting tiny fragments of illumination that made my eyes water. When I reached for my wine glass, my hand trembled slightly, just enough to make the liquid tremble on the surface. "I think I need some air," I announced, pushing back from the table with more force than I'd intended. The chair legs scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud. "Honey, you really don't look well," Mom said, rising from her own chair with the swift concern that had characterized her mothering since Marcus and I were small. "Maybe you should lie down for a bit." "I'm fine," I insisted, though even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. My legs felt unsteady as I stood, and the room seemed to tilt slightly to the left. Just need some fresh air. I made my way to the back door, my hand gripping the doorframe for support as I stepped onto the deck that overlooked Mom's carefully tended garden. The November air was crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of dying leaves and the promise of winter. I breathed deeply, hoping the cold would clear whatever fog seemed to be settling over my thoughts. Behind me, I could hear my family's voices continuing their dinner conversation, but the words seemed muffled, as if I were listening to them from underwater. I closed my eyes and gripped the deck railing, the painted wood solid and real under my palms. That's when I heard Marcus's voice, clearer than the others, drifting through the partially open door. "She's always been sensitive to medication," he was saying to our parents, his tone casual but somehow calculated. "Remember when she had that reaction to the antibiotics when we were kids? Some people just process things differently." Medication. The word hit me like a physical blow, sending a chill through my body that had nothing to do with the November air. Why was Marcus talking about medication? Unless the pieces began clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Marcus worked for a pharmaceutical company. He had access to medications I couldn't even name. He'd helped Mom in the kitchen. He'd handed me the sweet potato casserole personally. He'd asked about my drive, wanting to know when I'd arrived, wanting to know how much time he had. I stumbled back into the house, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The dining room felt like a stage set now, everything too bright and artificial. Mom and Dad looked at me with expressions of growing alarm, but it was Marcus I focused on. My brother. The person who had taught me to ride a bike, who had defended me from playground bullies, who had walked me down the aisle at my wedding 3 years ago when Dad's back was too bad for him to make the trip. "What did you put in my food?" The words came out as barely more than a whisper, but in the sudden silence of the dining room, they might as well have been shouted. Marcus's face went through a series of micro-expressions, surprise, calculation, something that might have been regret, and then a hardness I'd never seen there before. "Lily, you're not making sense. Maybe you should—" "What did you put in my food?" I repeated this time louder, my voice cracking with the effort. "Patricia, call Dr. Henderson," Dad said, rising from his chair with the careful movements of a man whose arthritis had been acting up. "Lily's having some kind of episode."
No! The word exploded from me with a force that made everyone freeze. "Don't you see? He drugged me! Marcus drugged me!" The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fire, acrid and choking. Mom's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Dad's face went through several emotions before settling into the stern expression he'd worn when Marcus and I were children, and one of us was in serious trouble. "Lily Christine Morrison," he said, using my full name the way he had when I was 10 and had been caught lying about breaking Mom's favorite vase. "That is a very serious accusation to make about your brother." But Marcus wasn't denying it. That's what I noticed through the growing haze in my mind. He wasn't jumping to his feet in outrage, wasn't demanding to know how I could think such a thing about him. He was just sitting there, watching me with those dark eyes that suddenly looked more calculating than concerned. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking on the single word. "Marcus, why?" For a moment, something flickered across his face that might have been genuine emotion. Regret, maybe, or sadness. But it was gone so quickly, I might have imagined it. "Because," he said quietly, "you were never supposed to remember what you saw that night." The words hit me like a physical blow, and suddenly I was falling backward into a memory I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it was a dream. 3 months ago, I'd driven up to visit for Mom's birthday weekend. I'd arrived earlier than expected, letting myself in with the key I'd had since high school. The house had been quiet, and I had assumed everyone was out running errands. But as I'd walked through the house toward the kitchen, I'd heard voices from Dad's study. Adult voices, speaking in the kind of urgent, hushed tones that immediately signaled secrets being shared. I'd paused outside the partially open door, not intending to eavesdrop, but caught by the tension in the conversation. Marcus had been there, along with two other men I didn't recognize. Well-dressed men with serious faces and briefcases that looked government-issued. They'd been discussing something about shipping routes and delivery schedules, about quantities and payments that involved numbers far too large for any legitimate pharmaceutical business. I'd only caught fragments before Mom had come home and called out a greeting, sending the men scattering through the back door and leaving Marcus to emerge from the study with a casual smile and a story about boring work stuff that needed Dad's input on some investment opportunities. I'd forgotten about it within days. The memory filed away under things that weren't my business. But now, with whatever drug Marcus had given me making my thoughts feel like they were moving through thick syrup, the memory blazed with new significance. "The men in Dad's study," I whispered. "You're selling drugs, real drugs, not just the legal ones from your company." Marcus's face had gone completely pale, but there was something almost relieved in his expression, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "You were never supposed to know, Lily. If you just stayed away, if you just minded your own business." "Marcus, what are you talking about?" Mom's voice was high and strained, the kind of tone she got when she was trying to hold back panic. "What men? What drugs?" But before Marcus could answer, before any of us could process what was happening, there was a sound that cut through the confusion like a blade. 3 sharp knocks on the front door. Not the casual knock of a neighbor or the familiar rhythm of family arriving late to dinner. These were official knocks, authoritative knocks, the kind of knocks that change everything. The knocks came again, more insistent this time, followed by a voice that carried the unmistakable weight of federal authority. "FBI! Open the door!"
The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, marking seconds that felt like hours. Mom's face had gone white as paper. Dad stood frozen beside his chair, the carving knife still in his hand. And Marcus looked like a man who'd been expecting this moment but had hoped it would never come. Through the growing fog of whatever he'd given me, I felt a terrible clarity settling over the situation. This wasn't just about a brother drugging his sister to keep her quiet about something she'd accidentally witnessed. This was bigger, much bigger. The knocking came a third time, accompanied by more voices, more authority. "We have a warrant. Open the door now." Marcus looked at me across the table, and for a moment I saw the brother I'd grown up with. The boy who had built blanket forts with me and shared his Halloween candy and cried when I'd left for college. But that boy was gone now, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. "I'm sorry, Lily," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry." The front door exploded inward with a crash that shook the entire house. The world exploded into chaos as armed agents poured through our shattered front door like a black-clad flood. Their boots thundered against Mom's carefully polished hardwood floors, the same floors where Marcus and I had played with Lincoln logs and raced Hot Wheels cars during countless childhood afternoons. Now those floors trembled under the weight of tactical gear and federal authority, and I watched it all through eyes that felt like they belonged to someone else. "Hands where we can see them. Everyone down on the ground." The voices came from everywhere at once, sharp commands that cut through the pharmaceutical haze clouding my thoughts. I tried to comply, tried to lower myself to the floor as instructed, but my limbs felt disconnected from my brain. Whatever Marcus had slipped into my sweet potato casserole was hitting me harder now, turning my muscles to liquid and my thoughts to molasses. I collapsed rather than knelt, my knees hitting the dining room floor with a jarring impact that sent shockwaves up my spine. The Persian rug that had been a wedding gift to my parents 35 years ago suddenly felt foreign beneath my palms, its intricate patterns swimming before my eyes like living things. "She's been drugged," I tried to shout, but the words came out slurred and weak, barely audible over the chaos surrounding us. "My brother, he put something in my food."
Through the mayhem, I could see Mom pressed against the wall near the china cabinet, her hands raised in trembling surrender. Her face was a mask of bewilderment and terror, her silver hair disheveled from the sudden commotion. She kept looking between Marcus and me, her mouth opening and closing without sound, as if her brain couldn't process what was happening to her family. Dad had dropped the carving knife and was on his knees beside his chair, his arthritic hands raised as high as his shoulders would allow. His face had gone gray, the color of old newspaper, and I could see the rapid flutter of his pulse in the hollow of his throat. At 70, he'd survived 2 heart attacks and a stroke. This kind of stress could kill him.
An agent with sergeant stripes on his tactical vest approached Marcus with practiced efficiency. Marcus James Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, money laundering, and trafficking in illegal pharmaceuticals. The words rolled off his tongue with the mechanical precision of someone who'd made this speech dozens of times before. As the agent began reading Marcus's rights, another federal officer knelt beside me. She was younger than the others, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes that seemed out of place in her stern face. Her voice was gentler when she spoke to me, professional but not unkind. "Ma'am, I'm Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI. Can you tell me your name?" "Lily," I managed, though my tongue felt thick and unresponsive. "Lily Morrison. Well, Lily Patterson now, but I grew up with Morrison." The explanation felt important somehow, though I couldn't quite grasp why. "Lily, you said your brother drugged you? Can you tell me what happened?" The question seemed to come from very far away, even though Agent Chen was kneeling right beside me. I tried to organize my thoughts, to put the events of the evening into some kind of coherent order, but everything felt fragmented and surreal. The sweet potato casserole. He made sure I got the sweet potato casserole, said it was special this year. And then he talked about how I process medication differently, like he knew what was going to happen to me. Agent Chen's eyes sharpened with interest. She turned to call over another agent, a tall man with prematurely gray hair who carried himself with the authority of someone in charge. "Agent Rodriguez, we're going to need to get Miss Patterson to a hospital for blood work, possible drugging by the suspect." Through the pharmaceutical fog, I felt a stab of panic. Hospital meant leaving my parents, meant abandoning them to deal with whatever nightmare Marcus had dragged our family into. "No, I can't leave them," I protested, trying to push myself up from the floor. "My parents don't understand what's happening. They're not part of whatever Marcus was doing." But my legs wouldn't support me. The room tilted dangerously to the left, and I found myself back on the floor staring up at the chandelier that had presided over so many family celebrations. The crystals were spinning now, throwing fractured rainbows across the ceiling in patterns that made no sense. Agent Rodriguez crouched down beside Agent Chen, studying my face with the clinical attention of someone trained to assess threats and victims. "What did you take, Miss Patterson? Do you know what your brother gave you?" "I don't know," I said, hating how helpless I sounded. Something that made everything feel wrong, made my thoughts slow down, made my hands shake. As if to demonstrate, I held up my right hand, watching it tremble like a leaf in a strong wind. "Could be a benzodiazepine," Agent Chen murmured to her colleague, "or maybe something stronger. He works for Pharmatech Industries, has access to all kinds of controlled substances." Pharmatech Industries, Marcus's employer. But now, listening to the agents discuss his employment like it was evidence in a criminal case, I began to see those details differently. The late nights weren't dedication to his career, they were criminal activity. The business trips weren't legitimate travel, they were drug runs. And the advancement opportunities? "How long?" I asked Agent Rodriguez, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long has he been doing this?" The agents exchanged a look with Agent Chen before answering. "We've been investigating your brother's activities for 18 months, he said carefully. "But we believe the conspiracy goes back at least 3 years." 3 years. The timeline hit me like a physical blow. 3 years ago, Marcus had moved back home after his divorce. They'd been harboring a criminal. My parents, who had never so much as gotten a speeding ticket. who donated to charity and volunteered at the church food bank, had been unknowingly providing cover for their son's drug trafficking operation. The realization must have shone on my face because Agent Chen leaned closer, her voice taking on an urgent tone. Before I continue with what happened next, if you're finding this story as shocking as I did living through it, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. There's so much more to this case that you won't want to miss. Lily, this is important. Did you ever see anything suspicious? Any unusual visitors to the house? Strange phone calls? Large amounts of cash? I tried to focus, tried to push through the chemical haze in my brain to access memories I'd never thought to question. There had been things. Now that I considered them through this new lens, the expensive watch Marcus had started wearing, which he'd claimed was a bonus from work. The way he'd always insisted on picking up the check when we went out to dinner, even though I knew pharmaceutical sales couldn't pay that well. The visitors. There were men, I said slowly, each word requiring tremendous effort. 3 months ago, when I came for Mom's birthday, I heard voices in Dad's study, but when I looked, Marcus was there with 2 men I didn't recognize. They had briefcases and they left through the back door when Mom came home. Agent Rodriguez and Agent Chen exchanged another look, this one sharper and more significant. Can you describe these men? I closed my eyes, trying to summon the memory through the fog of whatever drug was coursing through my system. One was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and expensive clothes. The other was younger, dark hair, and had a scar on his hand. I remember the scar because he was gesturing a lot when they were talking. Agent Chen was taking notes now, her pen moving quickly across a small notebook. What were they discussing? Numbers, I said, the memory becoming clearer as I focused on it. Big numbers, and something about shipping schedules. Container numbers, maybe? And Marcus was showing them papers, like he was reporting to them. The pieces were falling into place. Marcus was part of a larger drug organization. Agent Chen stood up, speaking quietly into a radio clipped to her tactical vest. I caught fragments of her conversation, something about expanding the search warrant, about additional suspects, about checking shipping records for Pharmatech Industries. Each word felt like another nail in the coffin of my family's innocence. Across the room, I could see other agents searching through Mom's china cabinet, pulling out serving dishes and examining them with gloved hands. They were looking for evidence, treating our family dinner like a crime scene, because that's what it was. That's what it had become the moment Marcus decided to poison my food, to keep me quiet about what I'd witnessed. Why me? I called out to Marcus, my voice cracking with the effort. Why did you have to involve me? He was in handcuffs now, flanked by 2 agents, but he turned to look at me with an expression I couldn't read through my drugged haze. For a moment, he looked like the big brother I'd idolized as a child, the one who had bandaged my scraped knees and helped me with homework and promised he would always protect me. Because, he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly across the chaos of the ransacked dining room, you were supposed to be safe. You were supposed to stay in the city with your perfect little life and never know what I had become. His words hit me with unexpected force, and suddenly I was crying, deep, wrenching sobs that shook my entire body. I was crying for the brother I'd lost, for the parents who were about to discover the full extent of their son's betrayal, for the family dinners that would never feel innocent again. But mostly, I was crying for the realization that the person I'd trusted most in the world had been willing to drug me to protect his criminal enterprise. Agent Chen was back at my side, her hand gentle on my shoulder. Lily, we need to get you to the hospital now. The sooner we can identify what he gave you, the better we can treat it. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. As 2 EMTs who had apparently been called to the scene helped me to my feet, I caught one last glimpse of my parents.
Mom was sitting on the living room sofa now, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, staring at the wall with the hollow expression of someone whose world had just been shattered. Dad sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, but his eyes were following Marcus as the agents prepared to lead him away. "Take care of them," I managed to say to Agent Rodriguez as the EMTs guided me toward the door. "Please, they didn't know. They couldn't have known." He nodded, his expression softening slightly. "We'll make sure they're taken care of, Miss Patterson, and we'll need to speak with you again once you're feeling better. Your testimony about what you witnessed 3 months ago, it could be crucial to our case." As the EMTs helped me into the back of the ambulance, I caught one final glimpse of the house I'd grown up in. Federal agents were streaming in and out, carrying boxes of evidence and photographing everything. The warm light spilling from the windows, which had always seemed so welcoming, now looked harsh and artificial. The Thanksgiving decorations Mom had spent hours arranging looked ridiculous and out of place, like remnants from a party that had ended badly. But it was the sight of Marcus being led to one of the black SUVs parked in our driveway that burned itself into my memory. My brother, the person who had taught me to ride a bike and tie my shoes, was now a federal prisoner. And I was the witness whose testimony might put him in prison for the rest of his life. As the ambulance doors closed and we pulled away from the house, I realized that this Thanksgiving hadn't just been poisoned by whatever drug Marcus had slipped into my food. It had been poisoned by the slow revelation that the people we trust most are sometimes the ones most capable of destroying us. And now, as the drugs in my system continued to cloud my thoughts and the sirens wailed through the November night, I had to figure out how to rebuild a sense of safety in a world where even family dinner could be a trap. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, though that cut deep enough to leave permanent scars. The worst part was the growing realization that I was going to have to choose between protecting my brother and protecting other families from the drugs he was helping to distribute, between family loyalty and justice, between the brother I'd loved and the criminal he'd become. And as the hospital lights grew brighter through the ambulance windows, I knew that choice was going to tear me apart. The phone rang at 3:17 in the morning, jolting me from the fitful sleep that had finally claimed me after hours of staring at the hospital ceiling. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or why my body felt like it was moving through thick syrup. Then reality crashed back. The Thanksgiving dinner, Marcus's confession, the FBI raid, the drugs still working their way through my bloodstream. I fumbled for my cell phone on the bedside table, my hands still trembling from whatever cocktail of medications my brother had fed me. The caller ID showed my parents' landline, the same number I'd been calling since childhood when I scraped my knee or needed help with homework or just wanted to hear Mom's voice when the world felt too overwhelming. "Hello?" My voice came out hoarse and uncertain. "Lily, sweetheart, thank God you're okay." It was Dad, and he sounded like he'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. "The agents finally let us call you. How are you feeling?"
The simple question opened a floodgate of emotions I'd been struggling to contain since the EMTs had loaded me into the ambulance. How was I feeling? Betrayed, violated, terrified, heartbroken. But mostly, I felt guilty for feeling those things about Marcus, which made no rational sense but felt overwhelming nonetheless. "I'm okay, Dad. Still a little fuzzy from whatever Marcus gave me, but the doctors say it'll wear off completely by tomorrow." I paused, listening to the silence on the other end of the line. "How are you and Mom holding up?" He stopped, and I could hear him struggling to find words for a situation that had no precedent in our family's experience. "The agents finished searching the house about an hour ago. They took boxes of things, Lily. Papers from my study, Marcus's computer, even some of your mother's serving dishes to test for drug residue."
The image of federal agents treating Mom's cherished holiday dinnerware as potential evidence made my chest tighten. Those dishes had served Thanksgiving dinners for 3 generations of our family. Now they were sitting in some FBI evidence locker, contaminated by association with Marcus's crimes. Did they find anything? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Another long pause. They found money, sweetheart. A lot of money, hidden in Marcus's room. Cash in amounts that... He stopped again, and I could hear Mom crying in the background. The agent said it was consistent with drug trafficking proceeds. Tens of thousands of dollars, Lily. How could we not know our son had that kind of money in our house? The guilt in his voice was devastating. My father, who had worked 60-hour weeks for 40 years to provide for his family, who had taught Marcus and me that honesty and hard work were the only acceptable ways to earn a living, was now questioning whether he'd failed as a parent. But the truth was more complex and more painful. Marcus had deliberately hidden his criminal activities from our parents, using their trust and love as cover for his illegal enterprise. Dad, you couldn't have known. Marcus is smart, and he's spent years learning how to hide things from people who care about him. This isn't your fault or Mom's fault. It's his choice. But we let him live here, Lily. We gave him a place to conduct his business. What if people think we knew? What if they think we were involved? His fear was understandable, but Agent Chen had already assured me that my parents aren't suspects of criminal activity. Still, I could hear in his voice the dawning realization that their association with Marcus would have consequences beyond just the emotional devastation of learning their son was a drug dealer. The FBI agent I spoke with said you and Mom aren't suspects. You were victims too, Dad. Marcus used your home and your trust to hide his crimes. That makes you victims, not accomplices. That's what Agent Rodriguez said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. But Lily, there's something else, something the agents told us that you need to know. The tone of his voice sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the drugs in my system. What is it? They said Marcus's arrest tonight was part of a larger operation. They arrested 12 other people in 4 different states, all connected to the same drug distribution network. And they said... He paused, and I could hear him taking a shaky breath. They said some of these people are dangerous, really dangerous. Not just white-collar criminals like we thought Marcus was, but people with histories of violence. The implications hit me immediately. If Marcus had been working with violent criminals, and if those criminals knew that a witness had helped bring down their operation, then I wasn't just a victim of my brother's betrayal, I was potentially a target for retaliation. Did the agent say anything about protection? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. They said they'd be in touch with you about that. But Lily, I think you should come stay with us for a while. I know the house doesn't feel safe anymore, but at least we'd be together. The idea of returning to the house where Marcus had poisoned me, where federal agents had just finished searching for evidence of his crimes, made my stomach clench. But the alternative, staying alone in my city apartment while potentially violent criminals tried to figure out who had provided information to the FBI, seemed equally terrifying.
Let me think about it, Dad. I need to talk to the agents first, find out what kind of risk we're actually dealing with. We talked for a few more minutes, but the conversation felt hollow, like we were both trying to maintain some semblance of normal family dynamics in a situation that had shattered every assumption we'd held about our family's safety and innocence. After we hung up, I lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling, trying to process the escalating complexity of what Marcus's arrest had set in motion. At 7 a.m., Agent Chen returned with coffee and the kind of serious expression that suggested my night was about to get more complicated. She'd changed clothes again, now wearing dark jeans and a simple gray sweater that made her look more approachable but no less professionally competent. "How are you feeling, Lily? Any lingering effects from the drugs? Better, I said, sitting up in bed. My thoughts feel clearer, and the shaking has mostly stopped. But Agent Chen, my father called a few hours ago. He said you arrested 12 other people last night? She nodded, pulling the visitor's chair closer to my bed. Operation Clean Sweep went into effect at midnight. Coordinated arrests across 4 states, targeting every level of the distribution network, from street dealers to high-level coordinators. Your brother was just one piece of a very large puzzle. And some of these people are violent? Agent Chen's expression grew more serious. Yes. The network wasn't just distributing prescription medications. They were also moving illegal narcotics, cocaine, heroin, fentanyl. That side of the business attracts a different kind of criminal element. The reality of what she was telling me settled over me like a heavy blanket. Marcus hadn't just been selling leftover prescription drugs to make extra money. He'd been part of an organization that dealt in the kind of substances that destroyed families and killed people. The brother who had once lectured me about the dangers of underage drinking had become the dealer in drugs that were claiming thousands of lives every year. What does that mean for me? For my parents? Honestly, we don't know yet. Most of the people we arrested last night don't know the identities of sources like your brother, and the network was structured to maintain separation between different levels of operation. But there's always a risk that someone, somewhere in the organization, might decide that eliminating witnesses is worth the risk. Her matter-of-fact delivery of this information made it somehow more terrifying. I wasn't dealing with a federal agent who was trying to scare me into cooperation. I was talking to a professional who had seen enough criminal organizations to know that witness intimidation and elimination were real possibilities. What kind of protection can you offer? That depends on several factors, Agent Chen said. How willing you are to cooperate with our investigation, for one, the quality and significance of the information you can provide, and the level of threat we determine you're facing. There it was. The implicit bargain that had been lurking beneath all of our interactions since the raid. My safety in exchange for my testimony against Marcus, and anyone else I might have information about. The FBI would protect me, but only if I was useful to them. I want to cooperate, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. I need to understand what I'm agreeing to. What exactly do you want from me? Agent Chen opened a folder she'd brought with her, revealing several photographs and documents. We want you to testify about what you witnessed in your father's study 3 months ago. We want detailed descriptions of the 2 men you saw meeting with Marcus. We want you to walk us through every conversation you've had with your brother since that day, looking for any information that might help us understand the scope of his involvement or identify other members of the network. She spread the photographs across the small table beside my bed. These are surveillance photos of people we believe are part of the distribution network. I want you to look at them carefully and tell me if you recognize anyone. The faces staring back at me from the photographs were a mixture of types. Some looked like ordinary businessmen. Others had the hard edges and suspicious eyes of career criminals. Most were unfamiliar, but when I reached the 4th photograph, my breath caught in my throat. This one, I said, pointing to a picture of a man with prematurely gray hair and expensive clothes. This is one of the men I saw in Dad's study. Agent Chen made a note in her folder. That's David Kellerman. He is what we call a regional coordinator, responsible for managing distribution networks in several states. If you can place him at your parents' house discussing business with Marcus, that's significant evidence of your brother's role in the organization. I continued through the stack of photographs, identifying the second man I'd seen that day. Agent Chen seemed pleased with my identifications, making additional notes and asking follow-up questions about details I remembered from the meeting. This is excellent, Lily. Your testimony could be crucial in establishing the organizational structure of this network. But there's something else we need to discuss. The seriousness in her tone made me brace for whatever was coming next. We have reason to believe that Marcus's role in the organization was more significant than just diverting prescription drugs. We think he may have been involved in the transportation and logistics side of the operation, helping to move large quantities of illegal drugs across state lines. The implications of this revelation hit me immediately. If Marcus had been involved in the transportation side of drug trafficking, that meant he'd been regularly traveling with criminal associates, meeting with dangerous people, possibly even crossing paths with the kind of violent individuals Agent Chen had mentioned. What makes you think that? Bank records show large cash deposits into accounts associated with your brother over the past 18 months. Far more money than he could have made just from selling prescription drugs. We also have cell phone records showing frequent communication with known members of the transportation network. Agent Chen pulled out another set of documents from her folder. These are records of your brother's cell phone activity for the past 6 months. Look at this pattern. Calls to the same numbers every Tuesday and Friday, always lasting less than 2 minutes. That's consistent with check-in calls used by criminal organizations to confirm shipping schedules and delivery times. Looking at the data laid out in front of me, I could see the systematic nature of Marcus's criminal activity. This wasn't someone who had gotten in over his head or made a few bad decisions. This was someone who had been operating as a professional criminal for months, or possibly years, using his legitimate job and our family's respectability as cover for serious federal crimes. There's something else, Agent Chen continued. We found evidence in your parents' house that suggests Marcus may have been using their property as a temporary storage facility for drug shipments. The words hit me like a physical blow. What kind of evidence? Chemical residue in your father's workshop. Traces of substances that suggest packages of illegal drugs were stored there, probably for short periods between shipments. Your brother had access to the workshop, and your parents rarely went out there, especially during the winter months.
I thought about Dad clearing out his beloved workshop to give Marcus a quiet space, about how proud he'd been to help his son get back on his feet after the divorce. The idea that Marcus had repaid that generosity by turning Dad's workspace into a drug storage facility felt like a violation that went beyond simple betrayal. Did my parents know? I asked, though I was fairly certain of the answer. We don't believe so. The storage appears to have been temporary. Packages would come in and go out within a day or two. Your parents wouldn't necessarily have noticed anything unusual, especially if Marcus was careful about timing. But even as Agent Chen assured me of my parents' innocence, I could see the larger problem. The house where I'd grown up, the place that had always represented safety and family love, had been contaminated by Marcus's criminal activities in ways that went far beyond what any of us had imagined. What happens to the house? I asked. Can my parents keep living there? That's complicated, Agent Chen admitted. If we can prove that criminal proceeds were used for mortgage payments or home improvements, there could be asset forfeiture issues. But given your parents' age and apparent lack of knowledge about your brother's activities, the prosecutor will likely be flexible. The bigger concern is safety. Safety? If other members of the distribution network know that Marcus was using your parents' house for storage, they might view your family as potential security risks, people who know too much, even if they don't realize what they know. The escalating danger of our situation was beginning to feel overwhelming. What had started as a family dinner that went horribly wrong was revealing itself to be just the tip of an iceberg that threatened to sink everything I'd believed about my family's safety and respectability. What do you recommend? Honestly, I think your family needs to consider relocating, at least temporarily. We can't provide around-the-clock protection for you indefinitely, especially if you're all living in a house that's known to members of a criminal organization. The idea of my elderly parents having to leave their home because of Marcus's choices made me angry in a way that surprised me with its intensity. They'd done nothing wrong except love and trust their son. Now they were potentially facing exile from the house they'd lived in for 35 years, the place they'd planned to spend their retirement, because Marcus had turned their property into a drug trafficking hub. How long would we need to stay away? That depends on how quickly we can dismantle the rest of the network and how cooperative the other arrestees are willing to be. Could be weeks, could be months. Agent Chen's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with a frown. "Excuse me, I need to take this call." She stepped out into the hallway, leaving me alone with the photographs and documents spread across the table beside my bed. I found myself staring at the surveillance photo of David Kellerman, trying to reconcile the well-dressed businessman in the image with my memory of the man I'd seen in Dad's study 3 months ago. He'd looked so ordinary, so respectable. If I'd passed him on the street, I would have assumed he was a banker or insurance salesman or any other kind of legitimate professional. But according to the FBI, he was a regional coordinator for a drug distribution network that moved millions of dollars worth of illegal substances across multiple states. It made me wonder what other ordinary-looking people in my life might be hiding criminal activities behind facades of respectability. If my own brother could fool me for years while conducting serious federal crimes, what did that say about my ability to judge the character of the people around me? Agent Chen returned to the room with a grim expression that immediately put me on alert. "What is it?"
We have a problem. 2 of the people we arrested last night have already made bail, despite our objections. Both have histories of witness intimidation, and both had direct contact with your brother over the past 6 months. The implications were clear and terrifying. Less than 12 hours after Marcus's arrest, potentially violent members of his criminal network were already back on the street, possibly looking for the witness whose testimony had helped bring down their operation. What does that mean for my safety? It means we need to move you to a secure location immediately, and we need to get your parents somewhere safe as well. Agent Chen began gathering up the documents and photographs, her movements quick and efficient. "I'm going to arrange for you to be discharged from the hospital and transported to a federal safe house. Your parents will be moved to a separate location. It's safer to keep you apart until we can assess the level of threat you're facing." The speed with which my life was being upended felt surreal. 12 hours ago, I'd been looking forward to a quiet Thanksgiving dinner with my family. Now I was about to be placed in federal protection because my brother's criminal associates might want to kill me. "How long will we have to stay in protective custody?" "I don't know," Agent Chen admitted. "It depends on how quickly we can identify and neutralize the threat. Days, weeks, maybe longer." As she helped me gather my belongings, I realized that everything I'd thought I knew about my family, about my safety, about the predictable patterns of my life had been permanently shattered by Marcus's choices. The brother who had once promised to protect me had instead put me in a situation where I needed federal protection to stay alive. But as federal marshals arrived to escort me to an undisclosed location, I also realized something else. Despite the fear and the betrayal and the complete upending of everything I'd believed about my family, I wasn't going to let Marcus's crimes destroy what was left of my life. I was going to testify against him and his criminal associates. I was going to help the FBI dismantle the network he'd been part of. And I was going to find a way to rebuild some sense of safety and normalcy for myself and my parents. Marcus had poisoned more than just my Thanksgiving dinner. He'd poisoned my trust, my sense of security, my faith in family bonds. But he hadn't poisoned my determination to see justice done, even if that justice came at the cost of sending my own brother to prison for decades. As the marshals led me through the hospital's service corridors toward an unmarked vehicle, I thought about the choice Agent Chen had described earlier, between family loyalty and justice. Marcus had made that choice easy by choosing criminal profits over family loyalty. Now I was making my choice too. And I was choosing justice. The safe house turned out to be a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a nondescript suburban complex about an hour outside the city. The furnishings were generic and temporary looking, the kind of place that could house anyone and leave no impression. But it was clean and secure, with federal marshals stationed discreetly in nearby units and surveillance equipment that would alert them to any suspicious activity. Deputy Marshal Janet Torres, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, gave me a tour of the apartment and explained the security protocols I'd need to follow while in protection. No contact with anyone outside of law enforcement without prior approval. No social media, no phone calls, no emails. If you need to communicate with your parents, we'll arrange supervised calls through secure channels. The isolation felt almost as threatening as the danger I was being protected from. But I understood the necessity. If Marcus's criminal associates were looking for me, any electronic communication could potentially be tracked or intercepted. "How are my parents doing?" I asked.
"They're safe," Deputy Torres assured me. "Scared and confused, but safe. Agent Chen will be meeting with them tomorrow to discuss their long-term security needs." That evening, as I sat in the generic living room of my temporary prison, I found myself thinking about the conversation I'd had with Marcus just hours before the FBI raid. His confession that I was never supposed to remember what I'd seen. His apparent regret about involving me in his criminal activities. The way he'd looked at me when he said he was sorry. Part of me wondered if there was still some trace of the brother I'd loved buried somewhere inside the criminal he'd become. But then I remembered the taste of the drugged sweet potato casserole, the calculated way he'd asked about my arrival time, the months of phone calls designed to monitor my memories of what I'd witnessed. Whatever trace of my real brother might still exist, it was buried too deep under years of criminal choices and systematic deception to matter anymore. The Marcus who had poisoned my dinner was the real Marcus now. The brother I'd grown up loving was just a memory, as poisoned and contaminated as the Thanksgiving meal he'd fed me. But as I prepared for what I knew would be weeks or months of testimony and depositions and court appearances, I also realized something else. Marcus's betrayal had revealed something important about my own character. When faced with the choice between protecting a criminal family member and helping law enforcement protect other families from the drugs he was distributing, I hadn't hesitated. I was going to testify against my brother, and I was going to help send him to prison for a very long time. Not because I didn't love him anymore, but because I loved him enough to hope that 20 years in federal prison might eventually help him find whatever piece of his real self was still buried under all the criminal choices he'd made. It was a faint hope, probably an unrealistic one, but it was the only way I could reconcile my lingering love for the brother I'd lost with my determination to see justice done for the criminal he'd become. Outside the safe house windows, the suburban neighborhood was quiet and peaceful, the kind of place where families raised children and planned for the future without worrying about drug dealers or federal protection or brothers who poisoned holiday dinners. Someday, I hoped, I might live in a place like that again. But first, I had to survive long enough to testify against the criminal network that had stolen my brother's soul and threatened to destroy what was left of my family. And that meant trusting federal agents with my life while I helped them build the case that would put Marcus and his associates away for decades. Thanks for watching this intense story unfold. If it kept you on the edge of your seat, please like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe for more true stories that prove reality is often stranger than fiction. It was a steep price to pay for one poisoned Thanksgiving dinner, but it was the price Marcus had chosen for all of us when he decided that criminal profits were more important than family loyalty. Now, we all had to live with the consequences of his choice. The federal courthouse in downtown Richmond loomed before me like a monument to justice and judgment, its neoclassical columns and imposing facade designed to inspire both respect and intimidation. As Deputy Marshal Torres escorted me through the security checkpoint, I couldn't help but think about how many people had walked through these same doors, carrying the weight of testimony that would change lives forever. Today, I was one of them.
It had been 6 weeks since Marcus's arrest.
6 weeks of safe houses and depositions and sleepless nights spent wrestling with the implications of everything I'd learned about my brother's criminal activities. The prosecution's case had grown stronger with each passing day, as more evidence emerged from seized computers and financial records. But Assistant U.S. Attorney Martinez had made it clear that my testimony remained the crucial piece that would establish Marcus's knowing participation in the network's most damaging operations. "Remember," Agent Chen said as we waited in the witness preparation room, "you're not just testifying about what you saw. You're helping the jury understand the systematic deception your brother engaged in to hide his criminal activities from the people who loved him most." I nodded, though my stomach felt like it was filled with lead. Through the small window of the preparation room, I could see the courthouse steps where protesters had gathered, some calling for harsher sentences for drug dealers, others advocating for treatment programs instead of incarceration. The case had attracted media attention as an example of how prescription drug diversion was funding larger criminal enterprises, and my family story had become a symbol of how drug trafficking affected even seemingly normal, middle-class families. "Is Marcus here?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "He's been in the courthouse since early this morning," Agent Chen confirmed. "His lawyers are making last-minute arguments about the admissibility of some evidence, but the judge has been pretty clear that your testimony will be heard." The door to the preparation room opened and Martinez entered with the focused energy that had characterized all of our interactions over the past 6 weeks. She was dressed in a severe black suit that emphasized the gravity of the proceedings, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had successfully prosecuted dozens of similar cases. "Lily, how are you feeling?" "Terrified, but ready." Martina sat down across from me, her expression softening slightly. "I know this is incredibly difficult for you. Testifying against a family member goes against every instinct we have about loyalty and protection, but I want you to remember something as you take the stand today." She pulled out a folder I hadn't seen before, containing what looked like photographs and medical reports. "These are files from emergency rooms in 3 different states, documenting cases of teenagers who were hospitalized for overdoses from drugs that we can trace back to the network your brother was helping to coordinate. Kids as young as 14, Lily. Some of them didn't survive." The photographs were devastating. Young faces that looked peaceful in their unconsciousness, but were actually fighting for their lives against chemical poisons that had been distributed by the criminal network Marcus had chosen to join. "Remember," Agent Chen continued, "I'm not showing you this to manipulate you into testifying. You've already made that choice, and I respect your courage in making it. I'm showing you this to remind you why your testimony matters. These children are the real victims of the crimes your brother committed. Your family's pain is real and valid, but it's not the only pain that matters in this courtroom today." The perspective was harsh, but necessary. For weeks, I'd been focused on the personal betrayal of Marcus's actions, the way he'd violated my trust, deceived our parents, and turned our family home into a criminal enterprise. But the broader impact of his crimes extended far beyond our private family suffering. The defense is going to try to make this about your brother's depression and financial problems. They're going to paint him as a victim who was manipulated by more sophisticated criminals. They may even suggest that your testimony is somehow tainted by anger or a desire for revenge. How do I respond to that? By sticking to the facts, by describing what you witnessed with clarity and precision, by letting the jury see that you're not testifying out of anger, but out of a recognition that justice requires truth, even when that truth is painful. A knock on the door interrupted our conversation, and a court clerk informed us that the judge was ready to begin. Martinez gathered her files and stood, her professional demeanor returning in full force. "It's time," she said simply. The courtroom was larger than I'd expected, with high ceilings and dark wood paneling that created an atmosphere of solemnity and gravitas. The gallery was filled with journalists, law enforcement officers, and what I assumed were family members of other defendants in the case. But my attention was immediately drawn to the defense table, where Marcus sat between two lawyers in expensive suits. He looked different than he had 6 weeks ago. Thinner, definitely, with the kind of hollow-eyed exhaustion that comes from weeks of stress and uncertainty. His hair had grown out slightly, making him look younger, but also more vulnerable. He was wearing a navy blue suit that I recognized, the same one he'd worn to my wedding 3 years ago, back when I'd believed he was the person I could trust most in the world. Our eyes met for just a moment as I walked to the witness stand, and I saw something in his expression that might have been regret or guilt or simple sadness at how our relationship had been destroyed by his choices. But then he looked away, turning his attention to the legal pad in front of him where one of his lawyers was writing notes. Judge Patricia Hendricks was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and the kind of stern expression that suggested she'd presided over enough criminal cases to have seen every possible variation of human weakness and criminality. She administered the oath with the mechanical precision of someone who had done it thousands of times, but her eyes were kind when she instructed me to speak clearly and take my time with my answers. Martinez approached the witness stand with the confidence of someone who had prepared extensively for this moment. "Ms. Patterson, please state your relationship to the defendant, Marcus Morrison." "He's my brother," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the courtroom sound system. "My older brother." "And how would you describe your relationship with your brother prior to the events that brought us here today?" It was a deceptively simple question, but one that required me to summon memories of a relationship that had been fundamentally altered by everything I learned over the past 6 weeks. "We were close," I said carefully. "Marcus was the person I trusted most in the world. Growing up, he was my protector. When I had problems at school or when I was scared about something, Marcus was the one I turned to. He taught me to ride a bike, helped me with my homework, walked me down the aisle at my wedding when our father was too ill to do it." I could see some of the jurors glancing toward Marcus, perhaps trying to reconcile the image of a protective big brother with the drug trafficking charges he was facing. "Did your relationship with your brother change after his divorce, approximately 3 years ago?" "Yes, in some ways. Marcus moved back in with our parents, and he seemed different, more withdrawn sometimes. But we all assumed he was dealing with the emotional and financial stress of his marriage ending. Our parents were supportive, and I tried to be supportive too." Martinez nodded, making notes on her legal pad. "During this period, did you notice any changes in your brother's lifestyle or behavior that seemed inconsistent with his legitimate employment?" "Objection!" one of Marcus's lawyers interjected, leading the witness. "Sustained," Judge Hendricks ruled. "Rephrase the question, counselor." "Ms. Patterson, what changes, if any, did you observe in your brother's lifestyle over the past 3 years?" I took a breath, organizing my thoughts before answering. Marcus seemed to have more money than I would have expected from his pharmaceutical sales job. He started wearing an expensive watch. He always insisted on paying when we went out to dinner, and he bought a new car about a year ago. When I asked him about it, he said he was doing well at work and had gotten some bonuses. Did you have any reason to question these explanations at the time?
No, Marcus had always been smart about money, and I knew pharmaceutical sales could be lucrative. I was happy that he seemed to be getting back on his feet after his divorce. Martinez moved closer to the witness stand, her next questions designed to establish the timeline that would become crucial to the prosecution's case. "Ms. Patterson, I want to direct your attention to a specific date, August 15th of this year, which was your mother's birthday. Do you recall visiting your parents' home that weekend?" "Yes, I do." "Please tell the jury what happened when you arrived at your parents' house that day." This was the moment I'd been preparing for.
The testimony that would place Marcus in a meeting with known criminals and establish his awareness of the network's broader operations. I arrived earlier than expected, around noon. I let myself in with the key I'd had since high school, assuming everyone was out running errands. But as I walked through the house toward the kitchen, I heard voices coming from my father's study. What kind of voices? Adult male voices speaking in urgent, hushed tones. It sounded like they were discussing something important or sensitive. What did you do? I paused outside the partially open door. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the tone of the conversation caught my attention. It sounded serious, businesslike, but also secretive. Martinez introduced photographs of the study into evidence, showing the jury the layout of the room and the positioning of the door that had allowed me to observe the meeting. What did you see when you looked into the study? Marcus was there, along with two men I didn't recognize. They were well-dressed, professional-looking, with briefcases. Marcus was showing them papers and what looked like charts or graphs. What was the nature of the conversation you overheard? They were discussing numbers, large numbers that involved thousands or tens of thousands. They talked about shipping schedules and delivery dates, container numbers were mentioned, and there was discussion about expanding operations into new territories. Martinez introduced evidence that correlated with my testimony, financial records that showed large cash transactions on dates that aligned with what I'd witnessed, shipping manifests that contained the container numbers I had overheard. How did the meeting end? My mother came home and called out a greeting from the front door. The two men immediately gathered their materials and left through the back door of the study, which opens onto our deck. Marcus came out of the study acting casual, like nothing unusual had happened. Did you ask your brother about the meeting? Yes. He said they were colleagues from work discussing boring business stuff, investment opportunities that needed our father's input because of his background in finance. Did you believe this explanation? At the time, yes. Marcus had always been truthful with me, so I had no reason to doubt what he told me.
Martinez then guided me through the months following the meeting, establishing Marcus's pattern of phone calls designed to monitor my memories of what I'd witnessed. Over the past 3 months, did your brother's communication patterns with you change? Yes, Marcus started calling me more frequently than usual. He had always been somewhat inconsistent about staying in touch, but suddenly he was calling every couple of weeks. What was the nature of these calls? He would ask about my work, my social life, whether I was planning to visit home. But he also frequently brought up my visit for Mom's birthday, asking if I remembered meeting any of his work friends or colleagues who had stopped by the house. I could see the jurors taking notes, beginning to understand the systematic way Marcus had been monitoring my memories and managing my perceptions of what I'd witnessed. What was your response to these questions? I told him I didn't remember meeting anyone, which seemed to relieve him. Looking back, I can see that he was trying to determine how much I'd actually seen or heard during that meeting. Martinez then moved to the events of Thanksgiving, the testimony that would establish Marcus's willingness to drug his own sister to protect his criminal enterprise. Ms. Patterson, please tell the jury what happened when you arrived at your parents' house for Thanksgiving dinner. I recounted the evening in detail. Marcus's unusual helpfulness in the kitchen, his insistence that I try the sweet potato casserole first, the strange taste I'd noticed but couldn't identify, the gradual onset of symptoms that I'd initially attributed to tiredness or stress. When did you first suspect that your brother had drugged your food? When I went outside for air and heard him talking to my parents about how I'd always been sensitive to medication. He was speaking as if he knew what was happening to me, as if he'd expected it. The courtroom was completely silent as I described confronting Marcus, his initial denials, and then his shocking confession that I was never supposed to remember what I'd witnessed 3 months earlier. What was your brother's exact response when you accused him of drugging you? At first, he tried to deflect, suggesting that I was having some kind of episode and that my parents should call a doctor.
But when I pressed him directly, when I demanded to know what he'd put in my food, he didn't deny it. He just sat there looking calculating. Did he eventually admit to drugging you? Yes, he said I was never supposed to remember what I'd seen that night in my father's study. The impact of this testimony was visible on the faces of the jurors, several of whom were looking at Marcus with expressions of shock and disapproval. Martinez then introduced evidence about the drugs found in my system, lorazepam and zolpidem, both substances that Marcus would have had access to through his pharmaceutical job, both drugs that could be crushed and mixed with food to impair memory and cognitive function. Ms. Patterson, as someone who worked in pharmaceutical sales, would your brother have understood the effects these drugs would have on you? Objection, the defense attorney called out, calls for speculation. I'll rephrase, Martinez said smoothly. Based on your knowledge of your brother's professional background and training, did he have experience with the medications found in your system? Yes, Marcus had worked in pharmaceutical sales for over 5 years. He regularly discussed the effects and applications of various medications as part of his job. He would have known exactly what those drugs would do to me. The prosecution then presented evidence about the broader criminal network, using my testimony about the meeting I had witnessed to establish Marcus's knowing participation in a sophisticated drug trafficking operation. Ms. Patterson, Agent Chen has shown you photographs of individuals believed to be part of the criminal network your brother was involved with. Were you able to identify any of these individuals?
Yes, 2 of the photographs showed the men I saw meeting with Marcus in my father's study. Martinez displayed the surveillance photographs for the jury, establishing the identities of David Kellerman and Thomas Riley as known drug traffickers who had been operating across multiple states. What significance, if any, do you place on your brother's willingness to meet with these individuals in your family home? Objection, the defense attorney interjected again, calls for speculation and opinion. Sustained, Judge Hendricks ruled. Let me rephrase, Martinez said. Miss Patterson, what was your family's attitude toward criminal activity or illegal drug use? We were completely opposed to it. My parents had raised Marcus and me to believe that honest work and following the law were non-negotiable values. The idea that any of us would be involved with criminals or illegal activities was absolutely unthinkable. So your brother's decision to host meetings with known drug traffickers in your family home represented what kind of violation of your family's values? A complete betrayal of everything we'd been taught and everything we believed in. The prosecution's direct examination continued for nearly 2 hours, systematically establishing Marcus's sophisticated criminal activities, his deception of his family, and his willingness to drug his own sister to protect his illegal enterprise. By the time Martinez concluded her questioning, the jury had heard detailed testimony about a man who had used his family's love and trust as cover for serious federal crimes. But I knew the real test would come during cross-examination, when Marcus's lawyers would attempt to portray him as a victim of circumstances rather than a calculating criminal. The lead defense attorney, Robert Steinberg, was a man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that suggested he specialized in high-profile white-collar criminal cases. He approached the witness stand with a manner that was superficially respectful, but carried an undercurrent of skepticism that made me immediately wary. Miss Patterson, I want to begin by acknowledging how difficult this situation must be for you. No one should have to testify against a family member, and I recognize the emotional burden you're carrying. His tone was sympathetic, but I could sense the strategic calculation behind his apparent compassion. You've testified that you and your brother were close, that he was someone you trusted implicitly. Is it fair to say that learning about his involvement in illegal activities was shocking and devastating for you? Yes, it was. And would you agree that discovering you'd been drugged by your own brother was traumatic in a way that might affect your ability to recall events with complete accuracy? I could see where he was heading with this line of questioning, attempting to suggest that my testimony might be tainted by emotional trauma or anger. The events of that evening are very clear in my memory. The doctors confirmed that while the drugs Marcus gave me impaired my motor functions and judgment, they didn't affect my ability to form or recall memories of what happened. Steinberg consulted his notes before continuing.
You've testified about changes in your brother's lifestyle over the past 3 years. The expensive watch, the new car, his willingness to pay for dinners. But isn't it true that these changes could have been explained by legitimate factors other than criminal activity?
I suppose it's possible, but given what we now know about his drug trafficking, it seems more likely that the money came from illegal sources. But at the time, you accepted his explanations about bonuses and improved job performance, correct? Yes, because I trusted him. And that trust was based on a lifetime of experiences with a brother who had been protective, caring, and honest with you. I could see the trap he was setting, trying to establish that Marcus's deception was so sophisticated that it fooled even his closest family members, supporting their argument that he might have been manipulated by more experienced criminals. Yes, but that trust was misplaced. Marcus was lying to me and to our entire family for years. Miss Patterson, you've testified about your brother's divorce 3 years ago and the financial and emotional difficulties he faced. Were you aware of the extent of his depression during that period? I knew he was struggling, yes. Did you know that he had been prescribed antidepressant medications? No, I didn't know about any specific medications. Were you aware that he had seen a therapist who had documented concerns about his emotional stability and decision-making capacity? Martinez objected to this line of questioning, arguing that medical records not in evidence couldn't be referenced in cross-examination. Judge Hendricks sustained the objection, but Steinberg had made his point to the jury. There might be medical evidence suggesting that Marcus's mental health had affected his judgment. Miss Patterson, in all your years of knowing your brother, had you ever seen him engage in any kind of violent behavior? No. Had you ever known him to use illegal drugs himself? No. Had you ever seen him interact with people you would characterize as criminals or unsavory individuals? Not until the meeting I witnessed in August. So, until that point, everything you knew about your brother's character suggested that criminal activity would be completely out of character for him. I could see where this was leading, and I tried to answer carefully. Until I witnessed that meeting, I had no reason to believe Marcus was involved in anything illegal. But learning about his criminal activities didn't change his character, it revealed his character. Steinberg pressed me on this point, trying to establish that Marcus might have been coerced or manipulated into criminal activity by more experienced criminals who exploited his vulnerability during a period of depression and financial stress. Isn't it possible that your brother was drawn into this criminal network gradually, perhaps without fully understanding the implications of what he was doing? The evidence suggests that Marcus was actively involved in planning and coordinating criminal activities. That doesn't sound like someone who was being manipulated. But you agree that the Marcus you knew growing up, the protective big brother who taught you to ride a bike and walked you down the aisle at your wedding, that person wouldn't have willingly chosen to become involved in drug trafficking. The question hit at the heart of my struggle to reconcile the brother I'd loved with the criminal he'd become. I think the Marcus I grew up with was real, but I also think people can change and they can make choices that transform them into someone completely different from who they used to be. The person who drugged my food and planned to expand drug distribution into school districts isn't the same person who taught me to ride a bike. And isn't it possible that this transformation was the result of exploitation by sophisticated criminals, rather than a genuine choice to embrace criminal activity? Over the following months, Marcus had been monitoring Lily's memories through seemingly casual phone calls, asking if she remembered meeting any of his work friends during her visit. These conversations, which Lily had interpreted as normal sibling check-ins, were actually systematic attempts to determine how much she had seen and remembered from the criminal meeting. The sweet potato casserole had been laced with lorazepam and zolpidem, medications Marcus had access to through his pharmaceutical sales job. He had calculated the exact dosage needed to impair her memory and cognitive function without causing permanent harm, turning his sister into an unwilling chemistry experiment to protect his criminal enterprise.
Before the family could fully process Marcus's confession, 3 sharp knocks echoed through the house. FBI, open the door. The federal agents had been conducting a coordinated operation called Clean Sweep, simultaneously arresting members of a multi-state drug trafficking network that Marcus had been part of for years. As armed agents poured through their shattered front door, the true scope of Marcus's criminal activities began to emerge. He hadn't been a reluctant participant or someone who had gotten in over his head. He was an active coordinator in a network that distributed over $50 million worth of illegal drugs annually across multiple states. The pharmaceutical sales job that the family had believed was Marcus's legitimate career was actually providing cover for his role as a supplier of diverted prescription medications. But his involvement went far beyond simple pill diversion. He was coordinating shipments between regions, managing logistics, and helping to plan the network's expansion into new territories, including areas near schools where children could easily access illegal substances. Lily was rushed to the hospital, where blood tests confirmed the presence of the drugs Marcus had given her. The medical examination revealed that he had used his pharmaceutical knowledge to create a cocktail specifically designed to impair memory formation and cognitive function while avoiding detection through taste or immediate dangerous side effects. Agent Sarah Chen, the FBI investigator assigned to Lily's case, explained that the network Marcus was involved with included violent criminals who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate witnesses who threatened their operations. Within days of the arrests, 2 of the detained individuals had made bail and were actively searching for the witness who had provided information about the meeting at her parents' house. Lily was placed in federal protective custody in a safe house, separated from her parents for their mutual protection. The isolation was almost as difficult as the betrayal itself, cutting her off from the family support she desperately needed while processing the complete destruction of her understanding of the person she had trusted most. The investigation revealed that Marcus had been earning approximately $200,000 over 18 months from his criminal activities, far more than his legitimate pharmaceutical job would have provided. The expensive watch, new car, and lifestyle improvements that the family had attributed to career success were actually funded by drug trafficking proceeds. As the investigation deepened, the scope of Marcus's betrayal became even more devastating. The family home hadn't just been used for occasional meetings. It had served as a temporary storage facility for drug shipments passing through the network. Marcus had converted their father's beloved workshop into a staging area for illegal substances, violating the sanctuary of family space for criminal purposes. The 2 men Lily had witnessed in the study were David Kellerman and Thomas Riley, high-level coordinators in a criminal organization that moved cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl alongside diverted prescription medications. The network had been responsible for 3 murders over the previous 2 years, deaths that resulted from territorial disputes over drug distribution rights. While Marcus hadn't directly committed violence, his role in coordinating the network's logistics meant he was complicit in an enterprise that included murder among its activities. The expansion plans Lily had overheard weren't just about increasing profits. They involved deliberately targeting areas near schools to create new markets among vulnerable children and teenagers.
When the case went to trial, Lily faced the most difficult decision of her life, whether to testify against her own brother. The prosecution made clear that her testimony was crucial to establishing Marcus's knowing participation in the network's most damaging operations. Without her eyewitness account of the criminal meeting and her testimony about being drugged, the case against the network's leadership would be significantly weakened. The courtroom testimony was emotionally devastating for the entire family. Lily had to describe in clinical detail how Marcus had calculated the exact drugs needed to impair her memory, how he had systematically monitored her recollections over months, and how he had been willing to chemically assault his own sister to protect his criminal activities.
Marcus's defense team attempted to portray him as a victim of circumstances, someone whose depression and financial problems following his divorce had made him vulnerable to manipulation by more sophisticated criminals. They presented evidence of his mental health struggles and argued that he had been coerced into criminal activity rather than choosing it willingly. However, the prosecution's evidence painted a different picture. Financial records showed Marcus had been actively and enthusiastically participating in the network's operations, earning substantial profits over an extended period. Phone records revealed systematic communication with known criminals, following patterns consistent with professional criminal coordination rather than reluctant compliance. Most damaging to the defense was Marcus's own decision to take the stand. Under cross-examination, his portrayal of himself as a reluctant victim crumbled as the prosecutor systematically demonstrated his active, calculated participation in serious federal crimes. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, money laundering, trafficking in illegal pharmaceuticals, and racketeering. The evidence had been overwhelming, particularly Lily's testimony linking Marcus's actions to his knowing participation in the criminal network's operations. At the sentencing hearing, the prosecution recommended 22 years in federal prison, citing the aggravating factors of using family relationships to hide criminal activity and assaulting a family member to prevent testimony. The defense presented character witnesses who testified about Marcus's positive contributions as a youth baseball coach and his struggles with depression following his divorce. Marcus himself addressed the court, offering what appeared to be genuine remorse for his crimes and their impact on his family. He acknowledged that drugging Lily had been unforgivable and expressed understanding that his actions had forced his family to choose between loyalty and justice. Judge Patricia ultimately sentenced Marcus to 19 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. The sentence reflected both the seriousness of his crimes and some recognition of his lack of prior criminal history and acceptance of responsibility. The immediate aftermath of Marcus's conviction left the family shattered in ways that extended far beyond his physical absence. Their parents, Patricia and Robert Morrison, struggled with overwhelming guilt about how they had failed to recognize their son's criminal activities, despite his sophisticated deception.
The house that had been the family's sanctuary for decades felt contaminated by its association with criminal activity. Federal agents had searched every room, photographed evidence, and treated family spaces as crime scenes. The parents eventually returned home but made significant changes to reclaim the space, converting Marcus's former workshop into a greenhouse and transforming the study where criminal meetings had occurred into a craft room for charity work. Lily returned to her apartment and attempted to resume her career, but the experience had fundamentally altered her perspective on trust, family relationships, and human nature. She found herself less trusting of surface presentations, more aware of how respectability could hide criminal activity, and more conscious of how family loyalty could be manipulated by people willing to exploit love for criminal purposes. The media attention surrounding the case gradually faded, but Marcus had become a statistic in articles about prescription drug diversion and the ongoing opioid crisis, a case study in how legitimate pharmaceutical access could be perverted to fuel illegal drug distribution networks. 6 months after sentencing, Lily received her first letter from Marcus in federal prison. The correspondence that developed over the following months was careful and limited, focusing more on family news and Marcus's participation in prison programs than on the crimes that had sent him there. Marcus wrote about his daily routine, his participation in drug treatment programs, and therapy sessions designed to help inmates understand the thinking patterns that had led to their criminal behavior. He described meetings with other inmates, some career criminals who viewed him as naive and privileged, others serving time for white-collar crimes similar to his own.
The letters served as a record of Marcus's gradual evolution from the criminal who had poisoned Lily's dinner to someone who appeared to understand the magnitude of his betrayals. Whether this represented genuine change or sophisticated manipulation remained an open question, but the correspondence allowed both siblings to maintain some connection to the family relationship that had once been central to both their lives. 5 years after the trial, Lily had completed her master's degree and changed careers, moving from marketing to social work with a specialization in families affected by criminal activity. The experience of navigating federal protection, criminal trials, and family trauma had given her insights that proved valuable in helping other families facing similar situations. Her work at the Family Crisis Intervention Center brought her into contact with numerous families dealing with situations remarkably similar to her own, discovering criminal activity by trusted relatives, struggling with decisions about reporting illegal behavior, learning to rebuild lives shattered by betrayal. While the details varied, the underlying themes were consistent: the devastating impact of family-based criminal activity, and the complex process of learning to love carefully while maintaining boundaries and accountability. One particularly significant case involved Jessica Chen, a graduate student who discovered that her father was running a money laundering operation through the family restaurant business. The parallels to Lily's experience were striking, including the moral complexity of potentially destroying innocent family members to stop criminal activity that was enabling serious harm to others. Through conversations with Jessica and similar consultations, Lily began to understand that her testimony against Marcus represented not just personal justice, but protection for countless families who might have been affected by the continued operation of his criminal network. 2 years after Marcus's sentencing, Agent Chen informed Lily that the final members of the drug network had been sentenced. David Kellerman received 25 years, Thomas Riley got 18, and the entire organization had been dismantled.
The successful dismantlement of the network provided some comfort to Lily, validating the personal cost of testifying against Marcus by demonstrating the broader protective impact of her decision. The knowledge that her testimony had contributed to such significant law enforcement success helped justify the emotional trauma of betraying family loyalty in service of justice. The government also offered financial compensation from assets seized from the network to help cover counseling and security costs the family had incurred. While the offer felt strange, as if putting a price on family betrayal, it acknowledged the legitimate expenses associated with surviving criminal victimization by a trusted family member. The most significant milestone in the family's healing process came 15 years after the original Thanksgiving incident, when Lily's mother decided they should resume celebrating the holiday together. For over a decade, Thanksgiving had remained too contaminated by memories of Marcus's betrayal to celebrate. But Patricia Morrison realized they were allowing his choices to continue controlling their family traditions. The decision wasn't made lightly. The dining room, where Marcus had confessed to drugging Lily, was the same space where they had shared thousands of family meals over the decades. The physical spaces held conflicting memories that were difficult to navigate emotionally. However, the family's determination to reclaim their traditions ultimately prevailed. The Thanksgiving reunion wasn't an attempt to pretend the past 15 years hadn't happened, but rather an acknowledgement that they remained a family, despite being fundamentally changed by Marcus's crimes. The celebration itself was both familiar and different. The traditional foods and preparations remained the same, but there was heightened awareness of what they were doing and why it mattered. This wasn't just another holiday dinner. It was an act of reclamation, an assertion. Lily's experience became the foundation for her professional work helping other families navigate similar betrayals. Her insights proved valuable in guiding people through the complex process of maintaining love while insisting on justice, of rebuilding trust while protecting themselves from further harm. The family she worked with dealt with variations on the same themes: trusted relatives engaged in criminal activity, the moral complexity of reporting family members to authorities, and the challenge of rebuilding relationships after discovering systematic deception. While details varied, the underlying emotional dynamics remained remarkably consistent. Her work validated the broader significance of her personal experience, demonstrating that family-based criminal activity was more common than most people realized, and that the therapeutic approaches developed through her own healing could benefit others facing similar circumstances. As Lily reflected on the 15-year journey from victim to survivor to professional helper, she recognized that the poisoned Thanksgiving dinner had been both destructive and educational. While she wouldn't wish the experience on anyone, it had taught valuable lessons about human nature, family dynamics, and the possibility of growth through trauma. Marcus still had 4 years remaining on his sentence, and his eventual release would present new challenges for the family. Whether they could rebuild meaningful relationships remained an open question, dependent on his demonstrated ability to maintain honest behavior over time rather than expressions of remorse or good intentions. The trust that had been so completely shattered could never be restored to its original naive form, but perhaps that wasn't entirely negative. The careful, conditional trust they might develop, requiring ongoing demonstration of honesty rather than blind faith in family bonds, might be healthier and more sustainable than what had existed before. The family had survived the worst kind of betrayal and chosen to remain connected despite having every justification for allowing those circumstances to destroy their bonds entirely. They had learned to love more carefully and trust more conditionally, but they hadn't lost their capacity for connection and care. The story of that poisoned Thanksgiving dinner ultimately became a testament to both the fragility and resilience of family bonds. Love and trust, while precious, could be weaponized by people willing to exploit family relationships for criminal purposes. But families could also survive even devastating betrayals if they were willing to do the difficult work of rebuilding connections on foundations of honesty rather than blind faith in family bonds. Marcus's Teresa's had cost his family their innocence and naive trust in family bonds, but they hadn't cost them each other. The family that celebrated Thanksgiving together 15 years later was different, scarred, wiser, more cautious, but still capable of creating meaning and joy together. The brother who had taught Lily to ride a bike was gone, replaced by someone she was still learning to understand. But the person she had become in learning to deal with his transformation, stronger, more aware, more capable of difficult choices when necessary, was someone she could be proud of. The most important legacy of that poisoned Thanksgiving dinner wasn't just the trauma it caused or the justice it made possible, but the discovery that healing and growth were possible even in the aftermath of the most fundamental betrayals. It represented proof that families could find ways to maintain love while insisting on accountability, could rebuild trust while protecting themselves from further harm, and could create hope based on choice rather than obligation. In a world where many families are destroyed by secrets and betrayals, their story demonstrated that survival, healing, and even redemption were possible, though they required courage, wisdom, and the understanding that true love sometimes demands the strength to choose justice over comfort, accountability over loyalty, and difficult truth over comfortable lies. The poisoned Thanksgiving dinner that had changed everything had also revealed something crucial about the nature of family resilience. These bonds were more fragile than they had believed, but also stronger than they had imagined, capable of surviving even devastating betrayals if rebuilt on foundations of honesty, accountability, and mature love that included boundaries alongside affection.